In our third video, we will take a look at the usage of and the rules for AR spelling changes in the preterite tense. The rules for conjugating these verbs are very similar to those of regular verbs. The only exception lies in the spelling change that will occur. So let's get started. In order to preserve their sound and uniformity, verbs that end in gar, kar, sar, and gwar will have a spelling change in the yo form only. All other forms of these verbs are conjugated just like regular verbs. The spelling changes that will occur in yo form only are as follows. For verbs ending in gar or gar, the G will change to a gu in yo form only. For verbs ending in car or car, the C will change to a QU in yo form only. For verbs ending in ZAR or SAR, the Z will change to a C in yo form only. And finally, for verbs ending in GUAR or GUAR, your GU will change to a GU with an umlaut. You should see the Prezi on my blog for a more extensive list of verbs. But for now, let's take a look at one example of each of these verbs. A common verb ending in GAR that will require an AR spelling change in the preterite tense is the verb jugar, or to play. Since jugar ends in GAR, it will receive a G to GU spelling change in the preterite tense yo form. Verbs like buscar will have a C to QU spelling change in the yo form of preterite tense. The verb empezar will receive a Z to C spelling change in the yo form of preterite tense because this verb ends in ZAR. And verbs like averiguar will have a GU to a GU with an umlaut spelling change in the yo form of the preterite tense. Again, there is a more complete list of verbs on my Prezi, but for now you should easily be able to recognize AR spelling change verbs in the preterite by their gar, kar, sar, and gwar endings. Just like regular verbs, AR spelling change verbs will also use regular preterite verb endings. And since these are AR spelling change verbs, they will use regular preterite AR verb endings. And those endings are aste, o, amos, astais, aron. Okay, now that we've reviewed our endings and are familiar with the spelling changes that will take place, we're ready to start conjugating. And remember, the conjugation of a spelling change verb is very similar to that of a regular verb, with the exception of the spelling change that will take place in yo form only. In fact, if you take a look at the rules on your screen, you can see that I've simply modified the rules for regular preterite verbs to allow for the spelling change. In other words, I've just added one more step that you have to tackle before conjugating these verbs. And those 3 steps are: 1, you will drop the infinitive ending. And in this case, all of your infinitives will end in AR. 1.5, you will make a spelling change in yo form only. And finally, you will add the appropriate regular ending. And remember, these endings must agree with your subject. Keep these rules and your chart of spelling changes in mind as we practice conjugating the verb jugar. If we take a look at our AR spelling change rules, we know that first we must drop the infinitive ending. And again, for jugar, our infinitive ending is AR. And you can see here that I've gone ahead and written the stem for every single subject. We have our yo form, tú, usted, él, ella, nosotros, vosotros, ustedes, ellos, and ellas. And now that this is complete, we move on to step 1.5, and that requires us to make a spelling change in yo form only. Since jugar is a G-A-R verb, we know that in yo form, we will change the G to a G-U. And here, you can see that change reflected in the stem. And the final step tells us that we must add the appropriate regular ending to our stems. And once we add our regular preterite AR endings, your conjugation should look like this. Jugué, jugaste, jugó, jugamos, jugastais, jugaron. Before we move on to another example of a conjugated AR spelling change verb, let's take a look at this chart, because this is what shows us why exactly we're making the spelling change. Again, I mentioned earlier that verbs ending in gar, car, sar, and guar will all have spelling changes. And this spelling change is necessary to preserve the sound of the verb. If we take a look at our GAR example, we know that here we're using the verb jugar as an example. And if you listen to me say the verb jugar, you can hear that the G sounds like a G sound. However, if we were to conjugate this verb without a spelling change, it would look like this. J-U-G-E. And it would be pronounced jugué. So if you listen, jugué does not sound like jugar. So, to preserve the sound of jugar and that G, we change the G to a G-U. And now it is pronounced jugué. Does jugué sound like jugar? Yes. So that is the purpose of the spelling change in the preterite. For car verbs, we are trying to keep the k sound. So if we look at our example of the verb tocar, and you hear the k when I say tocar, you see that T-O-C-E is how the verb would look if it did not receive a spelling change. And that would be pronounced tose. Tose does not sound like tocar, so we change the C to a Q-U, and now we have toque. Toque sounds like tocar, so we're good to go. Our next spelling change occurs in ZAR verbs, where our Z changes to a C. So if you hear me pronounce the empezar verb that we're using as our example here, you hear that the Z has a S sound. So, without a spelling change, it is pronounced empecé. And you hear a hard Z, not a S. This one's a little picky. So, we're going to change our Z to a C, and now we have empecé. Does empecé sound like empezar? Yes, we're good to go. The final spelling change occurs on GUAR verbs. And our example that we're going to use here is averiguar. And you can hear that the GU sounds like a gua there, almost a GW. So if we were to pronounce or conjugate the verb averiguar in yo form without a spelling change, it would be pronounced averigue. Averigue does not sound like averiguar. So we add an umlaut here, and that helps us to pronounce the GU with a gua sound. Think back to pinguino. So now we would pronounce it averigue. Does averigue sound like averiguar? Yes, it does. Wonderful. We're finished. And now that you know why the spelling change is necessary, you can see that it's important only in yo form because yo form is the only one that ends in an E. That begins in an E. All other forms will end in an A. And it's the E that causes that pronunciation trouble for us. And here you can see a completed conjugation for each type of AR spelling change verb in the preterit. And that completes our third video for the preterit tense. If you have any additional questions, please come see me before or after school. And, as always, for additional practice, you can check out my blog at mercyspanish.blogspot.com. In fact, that is where you can find my Prezi and a complete set of notes for this section. Happy studying!